Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And I actually talked about this in a video this last weekend. I wanted to bring you this article from the Washington Post, the new plan to remove 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, bury it. So let's see what this is about. This is another kind of, this is a bit of a different plan. It sounds possibly hopeful. I don't know. But it's another plan that involves carbon capture using agriculture or re-greening, if you will. It sounds like an idea plucked from science fiction, but the reality is that trees and plants already do it. Last month, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere surpassed 415 parts per million. This is from June 12th by Laura Riley. Excuse me. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere surpassed 415 parts per million, the highest in human history. Environmental experts say that the world is increasingly on a path toward a climate crisis. The most prominent efforts to prevent that crisis involve reducing carbon emissions, but another idea is also starting to gain traction, sucking all that carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it underground. Sounds like an idea plucked from science fiction, but the reality is that trees and plants already do it, breathing carbon dioxide and then depositing it via roots and decay into the soil. That's why consumers and companies often offset their carbon emissions by planting carbon-sucking trees elsewhere in the world. But an upstart company, Boston-based Indigo AG, now wants to transform farming practices so that agriculture becomes quite the opposite of what it is today, a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. By promoting techniques that increase the potential of agricultural land to suck in carbon, the backers of Indigo AG believe that they can set the foundation for a major effort to stem climate change. On Wednesday, the company announced a new initiative with the ambitious goal of removing 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by paying farmers to modify their practices. Called the Teraton Initiative, a teraton is 1 trillion tons. The company forecasts that the initiative will sign up 3,000 farmers globally with more than 1 million acres in 2019. David Perry, the company's chief executive, says he has lined up a group of buyers who will buy carbon credits, nonprofit groups, as well as consumer-focused food companies that could claim their products are not merely carbon neutral but carbon negative. Farmers will be given training and tools to institute what are known as regenerative practices. Indigo scientists will test soil samples for carbon content and farmers will be paid accordingly. It's completely outcome-based, Perry said. We don't really care how you get there. There's no requirement to be big or small, organic or conventional. At the core is the idea that plants breathe and through the process of photosynthesis turn carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into sugars that become leaves, stems, and roots. When a plant dies, decay brings organic material, a component which is a large carbon-based molecule is called humic acids, into the soil and binds them to the soil's molecules. Thus, the carbon is captured underground. The healthier and more fertile the soil, the more carbon it can store. The Rodale Institute, a major agricultural think tank, predicts that more than 100% of current annual global carbon emissions could be captured with a switch to widely available and inexpensive farming practices, such as not turning the soil over through tilling or plowing, replanting with cover crops after a main crop has been harvested, and rotating through different crops to put a variety of nutrients back into the ground. Merely planting trees won't get the world very far. Large and slower growing trees can sequester more carbon than smaller plants, but the world faces dramatic deforestation and has enormous agricultural needs. Farming seems like a practical focus for how to mitigate growing atmospheric carbon. Whether they can get to 1 trillion tons of carbon is unknown, Perry says, but this represents one of the largest agricultural experiments lately with software and satellite tools available for every farmer who signs up. The goal is to find out which crops, practices, and geographic locations have the ability to drive more carbon into the soil. To start, Indigo will pay farmers $15 per ton of carbon using venture capital raised by the company. Some farmers have already embraced the techniques. Russell Hedrick, a regenerative grower who farms non-GMO and heirloom corn, soy, barley, oats, and triticale in Hickory, North Carolina, has been measuring the carbon in his 1,000 acres, and the best he's ever done is 1.5 tons per acre. He says the indigo incentives could prove strong, especially at a time when farm bankruptcies are high and crop prices are sagging. Hedrick says that in 2018, an American farmer on average lost about $60 per acre before subsidies and made just $20 per acre after federal subsidies. Wow. So if a farmer can put 1.5 tons of carbon in each acre of soil and get paid by indigo, they can double their profits. For me, that would be $22 per acre, and we can farm close to 1,000 acres, he said. This is $22,000 for doing what I'm already doing. That's pretty huge to me as a farmer. Hedrick, a first-generation farmer, learned these practices from books and online videos from regenerative farmers. He doesn't till or plow, and he plants a cover crop within 10 days of harvesting a cash crop, like corn or soy, mostly small grains with roots that can go down 6 feet and reduce soil compaction and help retain moisture. Indigo is not the first organization to encourage farmers to prioritize putting carbon back in the soil. Iowa farmers tried it in the 1990s, and the California Healthy Soils Initiative has an incentives program that funds farmers who use practices such as compost application, mulching, no-till, and cover cropping. What makes Indigo's initiative different is the scale of the project and its multi-pronged approach, said Mark Bradford, an expert in soil ecosystem science at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. In soil science, there are these initiatives to rebuild carbon in the soil. The problem is measurement and verification. How do we make this economically and logistically feasible, he said. What I'm impressed by is Indigo has data science PhDs, and they're trying to do peer-reviewable, credible science. That said, Bradford said the scientific community has far from a consensus on whether this is a right approach. Some wonder whether it is feasible to change farmer practices to such an extent, and whether Herculean efforts will result in meaningful atmospheric carbon reductions. Other scientists worry that a focus on carbon in soil will redirect attention away from minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. Still others think that building up carbon could produce more nitrous oxide gas, which is even more warming than carbon dioxide. No one has the models or the data to determine who is right yet, Bradford said. We have lack of measurements. Indigo is doing the work on the ground to ask if this is feasible. Perry said that while most farmers are sustainability minded, it's hard to ask them to make sacrifices. To sequester carbon for the good of the planet, especially in the face of so many other financial and climatic, that was a stupid thing to say. Paying them to make this is a priority, he said, is the answer. Oh, okay. That's what he was trying to say. It is the only action we can take today whose impact matches the scale of the problem, he said. Instead of reducing the speed at which we approach the climate cliff, this enables us to start backing away from the climate cliff entirely. Let me know what you all think about this. I find it interesting. Actually, I think it's great. I think it's I don't know, beyond the use of whatever technologies they're going to use in order to do this, and obviously there's CO2 emissions involved in that. I think this is one of the better plans I've heard. At least somebody is trying something, and I applaud that. Lastly, I'm going to talk about this very quickly. This is from Waking Times. Minnesota will pay residents to turn lawns into bee sanctuaries. This is from June 10th, 2019. The government of Minnesota will soon be paying residents of the state to turn their lawns into bee-friendly habitats. The plan was approved by the state legislature last month and then signed into law by Governor Tim Walz last week. Over the next year, the state's government will set aside $900,000 to help residents convert their lawns into bee sanctuaries. The plan is very simple. The traditional suburban lawn is not good for pollinators or the ecosystem in general, so this initiative seeks to diversify the plant life that people have around their homes in hopes of creating an environment where bees can thrive. James Wolfen, a graduate assistant the University of Minnesota's Bee Lab and Turfgrass Science Lab, hopes that this measure will create a new trend. What I'd like to see from a philosophical standpoint is that communities and neighborhoods as a whole change their idea of what a perfect lawn looks like, just to be more bee aware and have more diversity in terms of what's planted. If we can maintain the rec surfaces we all enjoy, but also maintain and improve the forage bees rely on, that would be a success. How about turning your lawns into gardens? Ain't nothing wrong with that, although, lots of places have, rules in place that don't allow you to do that. Or if you're renting a home, obviously the landlord might not want you to rip up the lawn and turn it into a garden. Who knows? Anyways, interesting article. I'm going to link this below. You guys can have a gander at that. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.